everyone thought I would stay exactly where I was. Not because they hated me. Not because they wished me harm. But because they were comfortable with the idea that I would never become more. I was the kind of person people explained away with simple labels. Average. Unremarkable. Nice, but not special. They said these things gently, like kindness made them true. When people talked about the future, they spoke with excitement about others. Names followed by expectations. Possibilities. Confidence. When my name came up, the tone changed. She'll be fine, they said. She's not ambitious. She doesn't really want much. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was final. They had already decided who I was allowed to become. I didn't grow up invisible. I became invisible over time. At first, I tried. I raised my hand. I shared ideas. I worked hard. But every effort that didn't immediately shine was treated as confirmation that I simply wasn't built for more. Mistakes were remembered. Successes were minimized. When I struggled, people nodded knowingly, like it proved something they'd suspected all along. When others struggled, they were encouraged. When I struggled, I was observed. And observation slowly replaced support. By the time I reached adulthood, the expectations around me were light, dangerously light. No one pressured me. No one pushed me. No one warned me not to fail. Because failure was assumed. People expected very little, and somehow expected me to be grateful for that. You're lucky, someone once said. No pressure. They didn't realize pressure would have been a sign that someone believed I mattered. I took jobs people described as temporary, even when they lasted years. Work that paid bills but didn't impress anyone. When asked what I did, others answered for me. She's figuring things out. She's still finding her place. Those sentences followed me everywhere. And slowly, I started believing them. That's the most dangerous part of being underestimated. Eventually, you start estimating yourself the same way. The strange thing is, while everyone was busy deciding my limits, they stopped paying attention. That gave me space. Space to watch how things really worked. Space to notice patterns others ignored. Space to learn without being corrected. I saw how often confidence replaced competence. How loud voices shaped decisions even when they were wrong. How systems failed not because people were incapable, but because they were careless. I didn't announce these observations. I kept them to myself. Because every time I had spoken before, someone had simplified my thoughts until they were harmless. So I stopped explaining. I started experimenting quietly. Failures came often. But they were private. No audience. No commentary. Just information. Each failure taught me something specific. Where effort mattered, where it didn't, who could be trusted, who benefited from keeping me small. While people continued watching me stay a nobody, I was building understanding instead of recognition. And understanding compounds. Years passed. To them, nothing changed. They still spoke about me the same way. Still offered comfort instead of respect. Still assumed my story had already reached its ceiling. They were relaxed about my life. That should have been my warning. Because people only relax when they think the ending is predictable. The first hint that something was shifting came quietly. A conversation I overheard by accident. A question asked without malice. A pause that lingered too long. Wait, isn't she involved in that project? Another voice replied uncertainly. No. I don't think so. I didn't correct them. I just realized something important. They weren't watching anymore. They were guessing. And when people start guessing instead of observing, it means the story has already moved beyond their control. Once people stopped paying close attention to me, everything changed. Not on the outside. On the inside. Being underestimated creates a strange kind of freedom. When no one expects results from you, no one interferes. No one questions your process. No one monitors your progress. You become invisible in the best and worst way at the same time. I learned to use that invisibility. While others chased recognition, I chased clarity. I studied how opportunities were actually created, not the inspirational versions people posted online, but the messy, unglamorous mechanics underneath. I watched how decisions were influenced by timing, access, and confidence more than merit. I didn't have confidence yet. But I had time. And time, used properly, can compensate for almost anything. The work was slow and often discouraging. There were stretches where nothing seemed to move forward. Where effort produced no visible results. Where I questioned whether I was mistaking persistence for stubbornness. Those were the hardest moments. Not because I failed, failure had become familiar. But because no one would have noticed if I quit. That thought kept me going. I refused to disappear quietly. So I broke my goals down into pieces so small they felt almost insulting. Learn one thing. Improve one process. Make one connection. Then repeat. Day after day. No announcements. No posts. No validation. Just progress that only I could see. Occasionally, someone would check in. Still doing the same thing, they'd ask gently. I'd nod. They'd smile with relief, as if my lack of visible progress reassured them that the world still made sense. What they didn't see was that I had stopped chasing the same thing a long time ago. I was building leverage instead of appearance. I learned to sit in rooms where I wasn't supposed to matter and listen carefully. I learned which conversations shaped outcomes and which were just noise. I learned when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. Silence became a tool. When you stop trying to impress people, they reveal far more than they intend to. They explain their fears, their assumptions, their blind spots. I memorized those blind spots. There were moments of almost success that nearly broke me. Opportunities that came close, then vanished. Deals that collapsed at the last minute. Promises that dissolved once effort was required. Each time, I resisted the urge to tell anyone. Complaining would have reinforced the image they already had of me, struggling, unsure, perpetually behind. Instead, I adapted. Every setback refined my approach. Every disappointment sharpened my judgment. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my decisions began to work. Not dramatically, but consistently. The shift became noticeable only when people started asking me for help, quietly, privately, without acknowledging what it meant. They didn't frame it as reliance. They framed it as convenience. Can you take a look at this? What do you think about that? You're good at noticing details. I answered carefully. Helped without overextending. Watched how my input changed outcomes. It did. Again and again. That was when something inside me settled. I no longer wondered if I would rise. I understood how. And once you understand the mechanism, patience becomes easier. The irony was that the more capable I became, the more people assumed I was unchanged. They continued speaking about me in the past tense. Continued offering advice I had already outgrown. Continued feeling comfortable watching me exist without expectations. Their comfort was my cover. The moment that truly altered the trajectory arrived without ceremony. A problem others avoided. A responsibility no one wanted attached to their name. A situation where failure would be blamed, but success would be quietly absorbed. I stepped forward. Not confidently. Not publicly. Simply because I was ready. What followed were months of pressure no one saw. Decisions made with incomplete information. Adjustments under constraints others didn't know existed. Accountability without recognition. I delivered. Not perfectly. But effectively. And effectiveness has a way of rewriting stories people thought were finished. By the time they realized something was different, it was already too late to pretend nothing had changed. The watching turned uneasy. Questions replaced assumptions. Silence replaced comfort. They didn't know it yet, but the ending they expected was no longer possible. The change didn't announce itself with celebration. It arrived with discomfort. People began hesitating before speaking around me. Decisions that once excluded me now paused, waiting. My presence altered conversations in subtle ways, like a variable no one had planned for. They didn't congratulate me. They reassessed me. That was more unsettling for them than applause would have been. The first undeniable moment came in a room where outcomes mattered more than opinions. A meeting that had stalled for weeks. Too many voices. Too much ego. Too little clarity. I was there because someone needed support. Someone expendable if things went wrong. I listened. When I finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. I didn't challenge authority or raise my voice. I outlined the problem differently, stripping it of assumptions and rebuilding it around facts. The room went quiet. Someone asked me to explain again. I did. Another person leaned forward, slowly nodding. That actually solves it, they said. And just like that, the direction changed. No announcement. No acknowledgement. But afterward, people looked at me differently. Momentum followed. Not loudly. Not publicly. But steadily. More responsibility. More trust. More decisions routed through me without anyone saying why. People asked my opinion before they finalized things, then pretended it had always been that way. I didn't correct them. I understood the psychology. People don't like admitting they misjudged someone. They prefer to rewrite the past quietly. Family noticed last. They always do. At a gathering, someone mentioned my work casually, assuming everyone already knew. They spoke about it with respect, referencing results, scale, outcomes. My parents froze. Questions followed. Clarifications. Numbers. No one looked at me. They looked at the people who had spoken about me for years. The silence was heavy, not angry, not cruel, just revealing. Later, my father pulled me aside. "You never told us," he said. I met his eyes calmly. "You never asked," I replied. He didn't argue. Because for the first time, the facts were louder than the assumptions. The days that followed were strange. People reached out with curiosity disguised as friendliness. Old acquaintances reframed past dismissals as misunderstandings. Support appeared retroactively. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing the work. What surprised me most wasn't their reaction. It was mine. I had imagined this moment for years: vindication, satisfaction, maybe even anger. Instead, I felt distance. Not bitterness. Perspective. I realized something important. They didn't watch my struggle because they cared. They watched it because it made them comfortable. My struggle reassured them that the world worked the way they understood it. My rise disrupted that comfort. I didn't become loud after that. I didn't seek attention. I simply stopped shrinking. I spoke when I had something to say. I declined when something didn't align. I moved forward without explaining myself to people who had already decided my worth once before. Some adjusted. Some didn't. That was no longer my concern. Everyone thought I'd stay a nobody. Not because I lacked ability, but because they needed me to. When I rose, the surprise wasn't in my success. It was in the realization that they had been watching the wrong story the entire time. And by the time they noticed, the ending had changed. It was already over.